Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Western Suburbs podcast as we look ahead to round one of the IHSA playoffs. I'm Josh Welge. I'm here with Joel Boenitz. We're taping here on Thursday morning, Halloween morning. Joel, it's the wind's howling outside. It's that time of year. It's getting into playoffs. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. After the madness that happened last week, it's time for more to continue with the playoffs starting. So I'm really excited to see what happens.
Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite times of the year from a sports perspective as a high school writer. I mean, it's kind of like as a sports fan, I think March Madness is one of my favorite times of the year because you get the brackets and you can kind of look ahead to the matchups. And this is sort of a IHSA football type of similar situation. So a lot of fun, a lot of stuff we're going to break down. As we look ahead to this weekend's games. Before we do that, I wanted to kind of look back, look ahead. You were at a big game last Friday. Geneva St. Charles North, decided the Duquesne Conference title. And man, St. Charles North coming through with a big win. And Ethan Plum, as he's done before, really delivered for them.
Yeah, definitely. It was very similar to how both of these teams played up against Batavia earlier in the week or earlier in the season. In that St. Charles North Batavia game, Batavia found his second gear in the fourth quarter in order to win. In Geneva Batavia, Geneva found a second gear in order to get a win. And this time around, it was St. Charles North who got the second gear against Geneva in order to get the win. And once again, Ethan Plum carried St. Charles North on its back throughout the stretch with 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns. It was just a career game for him on the ground. And it caused madness atop the Duquesne Conference because of it, because there was not only a share or two-way share between St. Charles North and Geneva, but something we'll talk about later probably is a 3-way share with Batavia as well. So, overall, a really fun game that caused a lot of chaos atop the
Yeah,
Duquesne.
Ethan Plum has just delivered, again and again in clutch situations. I mean, did Friday, did against Wheaton Warrenville South and a comeback win. I believe he did, the game against Palatine at the beginning of the year. I mean, he just continues to make plays for them, and it sets them up as we look ahead to the playoffs. I mean, they got the 3 seed in the Class 7A bracket. They'll be starting up with Rolling Meadows. Rolling Meadows, if people are not aware of, they're coached by former Bears kicker Robbie Gould. What have you been able to learn about Rolling Meadows?
Well, it looks like with Rolling Meadows is that they've had some success earlier in the season with their first season under Robbie Gould, but against playoff teams, they've kind of been mediocre, dare say. They've lost their last 2 over these past 2 weeks. Their first loss was to I believe it was Hersey that they lost to, and then they also lost to Elk Grove to end the season. So they're kind of on a down stretch right now. They've lost 3 of their last 4 heading into the playoffs. But they kind of or when they win, they've been doing it in a pretty solid fashion. All of their wins have been decided by more than 1 touchdown. So if whenever they win, it's not close. So if St. Charles North could keep it close throughout the entire game, or just kind of blow them out of the water from the start, it should be a pretty easy win for St. Charles North.
Yeah, the way that bracket sets up, I mean, they potentially could face Mount Carmel in the second round of the playoffs, and then if they were fortunate enough to get by that, potentially Normal Community, 2 very difficult opponents there. But obviously different year, but there's a history there. Mount Carmel or St. Charles North, when they went to state, I believe in 2018, they beat Mount Carmel in a very memorable semifinal game. Tyler Newbin, who's now with the Giants, he just put St. Charles North on his back. They got a quarterback right now that can maybe do that potentially as well. So, Mount Carmel is really good. They've shown a few chinks in the armor this year. So maybe they're not, completely the odds-on favorite in 7A, but still a tough opponent. But man, St. Charles North with the quarterback playing the way he's playing right now, I like their chances to maybe make a little noise in the playoffs. I like Geneva's chances as well. I mean, that was obviously a difficult, loss for them to lose to that game, but Geneva is still set up well. They're the 3 seed. in the Class 6A North bracket. Good for them as they are on the opposite end of the bracket as East St. Louis, which is you definitely want to do. They wouldn't face Cary Grove until a semifinal. So you like that as well. Geneva, what do you take out of that loss that maybe they can, hopefully build on? And what do you think about them going in the playoffs? They open against a Munson from the Public League on Saturday. It should be a win. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think Boone Thorgerson summed it up pretty easily whenever he talked to us after Friday's loss. Everybody enters the playoffs at 0-0. And, it's a win or go home situation afterwards. So it's pretty much a clean slate for Geneva. And indeed, it's a perfect time to get their first loss of the season to have that refresh heading into the playoffs. Obviously, they would have wanted to enter at 9-0, but it's even better to have that refresh now. But I think it's a good learning experience because, this team has had so much success on offense so far this season, and their defense has done really well also. And that game against St. Charles North was the first time where both of them weren't really on the top of their game. So I think it's a really good refresh for them. And I think facing off against a team like Amundsen in that first round is going to do wonders for them, especially down the line when they're facing teams like, Burlington Central in the second round. Yeah. Should be interesting to see.
Interesting potential second round game. Burlington Central could be playing Geneva in the second round if that works out. I noticed that as well. That kind of caught my attention about that potential matchup between teams that really don't face each other, but they're not that far away geographically. Joe, you had mentioned the Duquesne Conference ending up as a three-way tie. Batavia gets the third piece of it, but man, they really had to fight last week against Glenbard North. That score surprised me.
Yeah, I think Glenbard North wanted to secure the fact that, they wanted to make sure that they didn't have two consecutive seasons in the Duquesne Conference where they didn't have a win. And, they really put it to Batavia. It was a 35-34 final in that game. Nathan Whitwell rushed for 3 touchdowns that kind of led Batavia's offense. But Donato Gatsis of Glenbard North also rushed for 3 touchdowns, and he had a chance to actually win the game on a 2-point conversion with 4 minutes left. But Batavia's defense, stopped him right at the goal line. There's a clip of it on Twitter, and it's a really close play. He was like one extension away from getting into the end zone, but they were able to stop it and then got 2 first downs on the following drive in order to secure the game, and also a 6-1 record, 6-1 record in the conference in order to secure, I believe, their 5th conference title in 6 years. It's a lot over these past 6 years in the Duquesne Conference.
Yeah, no, they've definitely established themselves atop of the pecking order in that conference, in a really good league over the last several years. And I think they set up. I like their draw as well. They have Collinsville come up to their place on Friday night for a 6:00 kickoff. You'll be there for that, and then if they're fortunate enough to get by that, then you're looking at potentially like a Pekin or a Lincoln Way West. Specifically, you're not looking at a Mount Carmel or somebody like that. Potentially could get a Downers Grove North or Brother Rice in a quarterfinal. I like that draw for Batavia. I'm not sure about this team, if they are that team that can maybe get to the championship game or something like that, but I wouldn't doubt that program. What do you make about where they're at right now?
I think we're just really happy to see Mount Carmel on the other side of the bracket this year. They've ended their season 3 consecutive years in a row. So to see Mount Carmel on the other side, they probably were just like, yes. But I think one big thing that we've talked about this year with Batavia has been their defense and how they've excelled in pretty much all facets of it. Front line, you've got guys like Xavier Blankwell, Malachi Smith. In the midfield, you got RJ Bohr and Jacob Jansen kind of patrolling that part. And then defensive backs, Chase Osborne led the Duquesne Conference in tackles this season. Josh Calley, you got him back healthy right at the right time. And then you've also got, up-and-coming guys like Matthew Hansen, Andrew Collada, who are patrolling the outside. And, they really excelled this season. And the main question is going to be, is their offense going to live up to that standard? Obviously, we've talked about Nathan Whitwell a whole lot this season, But it's also going to be talking about, the quarterback play from Bodie Anderson, the wide receiver play from Isaiah Brown, and Brett Berggren. So it's going to be a full team effort if they want to make it back into the state title game.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, they're gonna have to, their defense is really gonna have to rise up and play well, and obviously Nathan Whitwell is gonna do what he's been doing, and then quarterback can make some plays as well. But again, that's a program I'm not betting against. There's certain programs that if you bet against, you're gonna lose money, and Batavia is definitely one of them. They're just they get it done year in and year out. You mentioned a team want to get back to the 7A final. Downers Grove North, a team that reached the 7A championship game last year, got off to a great start to the year. Big for them in week 9. In week 7, their talented quarterback, Owen Lansu, that's going to Minnesota. He left the game against York, their only loss, with an injury. He returned in a big way in week 9. He threw for well over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. They were able to fight off a tough Inns Hill Central team that was fighting for their playoff lives. And man, I mean, that really, that makes me feel, and I'm sure it makes Downers Grove North fans feel a lot better about their chances to potentially make another deep run when you got Owen Lands, who is one of the best quarterbacks in the state. He's got some weapons around him, and then they got a great defense. They did give up a fair amount of points against Inns Hill Central, but that's very unlike them. They've been dominant for most of the season. They start up against Wheaton Warrenville South, who, man, obviously they played a tough schedule. And one thing about Wheaton South that I noticed in looking at that matchup is that they put up a lot of points. I mean, Luca Carbonero and Williams and those guys and Owen York, they put up a lot of points. So, that's not a gimme of a first round matchup for Downers Grove North. And then, they potentially get a Brother Rice Fenwick in the second round. And then, I hate looking ahead, but I'm not a coach, so I'll look ahead. Batavia Downers Grove North at quarterfinal is just a wow type quarterfinal game if it happens. So, we'll see what happens, but certainly Downers Grove North, with Lanzu back in the lineup, feeling pretty good about their chances. And he wasn't just back in the lineup. I mean, he had a huge game last Friday. He wasn't just handing off for 30 minutes. Another team in the West Suburban Silver we've talked about on the last few weeks in this podcast, Lyons Township. Finishing 9-0. It's the first 9-0 regular season for that program since 1943. And when you're going back, 80 years or so, that's saying something. I mean, they were able to beat to win at West Suburban Silver, first time since 1987 outright. And now they're, they were only one of 21 undefeated teams that are statewide. It's a very low number according to Seuss. And now they're set up well. I mean, they have a very high seed in the Class 8A bracket. They're the number 2 seed. They play Joliet West. Very important for them, I would say, is that Lincoln Way East and Loyola are both on the other end of the bracket. Again, those are teams that you usually, want to avoid. But man, I like Lyons Township with their defense has been great all year. Danny Carroll running the football, Don Pisciotti, and Travis Stam is one of the best receivers in the state. They can make some noise. They made the quarterfinals a couple years ago, made the second round last year, but they got a nice draw. I think they can do some things, Lyons Township.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you kind of mentioned how dominant the defense has been this year. I mean, their most amount of points that they've given up this season is 22 points. That was the Wheaton Warrenville South, and the majority of that came, kind of when they had already secured the victory to that point. So, yeah, no, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes, especially with that draw with Loyola and Lincoln Way East on the other side. They do have to face a team in the quarterfinals that we're going to be, or potentially in the quarterfinals that we're going to be talking about in just a second, but in Oswego. But yeah, no, it should be a really good draw for them, and it should be interesting to see how they play, in these first couple of rounds.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But yeah, you mentioned Oswego. They're another one of the 9-0, the 21 teams that finished 9-0 statewide. Great regular season for them. Similar to, they're a little bit similar to Lyons Township, to be honest with you. They have a great defense. 3 great linebackers, Carson Cooney going to Iowa. Mikey Claycomb was a really talented kid as well. Similar to Lyons Township, they have a very good wide receiver, Jeremiah Kane, going to Northern Iowa. They don't always score a ton of points, But if you give their defense, 15 or 14, 17, 20 points, you're feeling pretty good about things. But now, they host Wabanzi Valley in the first round of the playoffs. Wabanzi Valley in the playoffs for the first time since 2018. Those two teams are not separated by a lot of geography, but they haven't played each other in almost 10 or 11 years, I think. But man, if their offense can, score a few points for them, the defense will travel. And it may have to travel because in the second round of the playoffs, if Edwardsville were to beat York, which is a very good first round game, then Oswego could be going down to Edwardsville, and that's a very long drive. But yeah, I mean, Oswego, they're going to go as far as their defense takes them. Their defense is tremendous.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously we've talked about it all season, how good Oswego's defense has been. And, a game in Edwardsville is definitely going to put them up to the challenge down the line. But for now, obviously, their focus is on Wabanzi Valley, and it should be a pretty fun game.
Absolutely. I mean, Wabanzi Valley, they play in a good league. I mean, they both have I hate doing the common opponents thing, but they both played Oswego East and they both beat them by 2 touchdowns. So Wabanzi Valley's got a good running back, Christian Simmons. They've had a really nice year. Coincidentally, those two teams played in they did one of those joint practice things in July. And I was actually out there, and those two teams met each other on the field, and just kind of interesting that they face each other when it's July and it was 90 degrees or whatever, and now it's not 9 degrees and it's really windy out, and they're going to face each other again. But I thought that was kind of interesting to note that they've seen each other this year, but it's been a while. Moving down to 5A, another really good game last Friday. St. Francis beating Nazareth. What a game for Brady Palmer. He took a late hit early in the game, was able to come back. He threw for, I think 4 touchdown passes, with one to Nate Washington to win the game. And they get a really nice week 9 win. And St. Francis, man, that's really good momentum going into the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, heading into the week, their coach was kind of talking about how, they were definitely on the rise and they wanted to prove how good they were, late in the season. And I think they've definitely done that. And that win against Nazareth was definitely, an exclamation point for them heading into the postseason. And, it should definitely bring them, or it should definitely give them good momentum heading into the playoffs, especially considering their draw in the 5A. So, I'm really excited to see how this team kind of progresses forward. And, maybe we'll have another St. Francis Nazareth semifinal this year, which would feed families basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up for potentially of those teams. I mean, obviously a lot of hurdles to clear there. I mean, I'm looking at the bracket. Sterling plays at St. Francis this week, and if St. Francis was fortunate enough to get by that, then they're looking at Prairie Ridge in the second round. I mean, that's a really tough second round game. And then if they're able to get by that, then they're almost certainly looking at a game with undefeated Sycamore in a quarterfinal, who's just quietly putting along a 9-0 season, and then similar to that. I mean, Nazareth. If they're able to get by their first couple of games, they could face another very good interstate A conference team, Rochelle, that's had a really good season. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, as a football fan, as a fan of teams that like to score a lot of points, I mean, I would gladly take another St. Francis Nazareth game. And it's interesting with Nazareth. I mean, their offense can really put up the points, and it's shown that, and it showed it last Friday. But their defense has been really good for most of the year. But they've had a couple hiccups. I mean, Mount Carmel really put a lot of points up on them, and then St. Francis did as well. So I don't know. I mean, similar to Geneva, a week 9 loss, maybe not the worst thing in the world. I mean, maybe get the guys a little bit kind of reset going to the playoffs. You took a loss. Maybe we're not quite as good as we thought we were. Maybe we need to focus a little bit more during practice. I'm not saying they weren't doing that during practice, but for a team that's already got their playoffs secured, and they're not going for a 9-0 season or anything, I don't think a week 9 loss is the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, it's definitely a big wake-up call for them this time around. I mean, it was last season as well. I mean, they had that loss to St. Francis last year, and then they went on to win the 5A championship. So who knows? It could happen again. Logan Malachuk has proven once again that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the state. and he definitely did that last night, or not last night, Friday. He, but it's definitely going to be a full team effort once again. And if they want to make it back to the state title game this season, and it should be interesting to see how they rebound from that loss in the playoffs.
The other thing that has to be noted too is that teams like Nazareth, teams like St. Francis, I mean, playing in that Chicago Catholic League, East Suburban Catholic, I mean, that is just a grind week in and week out. You're facing tough competition week in and week out. And, if you're fortunate enough to survive that, if you're fortunate enough to be in one piece and be relatively healthy, I'm not saying the playoffs is a cakewalk, but you're ready. Let's just say you're ready. And I don't think it's any coincidence that a team like Nazareth, that they have their struggles during the regular season the last couple of years, but once they get to the playoffs, it's like new season, we're good, and they've shown that. And so is St. Francis. I mean, St. Francis, I know everybody talks about Nazareth, rightfully so, but St. Francis has been a regular in the semifinals the last couple of years. They just haven't quite taken that next step to the state championship game. But they've really, been a team that has made a run. Which kind of segues into another team I want to talk about here is Montini down in Class 3A. Montini reached the Class 3A semifinals last year, and they followed it up with a really good regular season, going 7-2. They finished on a roll. They beat St. Lawrence 28-3 in the final. And really notable for Montini is that they have a lot of guys back defensively and offensively from a team that reached the semifinals last year. But, they earlier in the season, they kind of rotated quarterbacks. They had a couple quarterbacks, but about midway through the season, I feel like they kind of turned the keys over to their sophomore, Israel Abrams. And that offense, it seems like, has just taken off since he's taken over at quarterback. I think they're averaging something like 30, 35 points a game over the last 5 games. And there's a couple games during a year where they had to play some really low scoring games. Fenwick kind of stands out where they didn't really score a lot of points, but it seems like they've really taken off offensively to go along with a very good defense. So they're a team that, I mean, we look ahead. Well, I have no problem looking ahead with them because, and they don't either, because they potentially could be getting a rematch of last year's semifinal in the second round. Montini could be playing Byron. The game would be at Montini, and it's funny. I was at their playout or their practice yesterday. I was giving out the Friday Night Drive Team of the Week MVP to their center, Luke Jezik, and I wasn't going to bring it up about Byron, and he brought it up. I mean, before I could even ask about Byron, he was already talking about Byron. And he was talking about how, they want that game not only for themselves, but for the seniors last year that worked so hard that they weren't able to quite get it done. That was a very close game that they lost. Is Byron's toughest game in the playoffs last year. That is a second round game that I have circled on the calendar, and I have it circled 3 or 4 times with red ink. I mean, that could be for the Class 3A state championship. Byron going to Montini in second round.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, you mentioned it. They've kind of turned the page in the second half of the season. I mean, those 2 losses against Marist and Fenway definitely opened up their eyes before ending the season on a 5-game win streak. And like you mentioned, whenever or if they were to face Byron in the second round, which probably a good chance of that happening, that's going to be, probably one of the main games to watch, not just for 3A, but possibly in the entire state. I mean, I can only think of one possible game that's, a little, or that could be as good as that game. And, that's a game I'm potentially going to be at next week. But we'll see what happens whenever everything falls out. Because, if there's one thing I learned from not just, week 9, but from looking at, playoffs past, anything can happen in the playoffs. So, and any of these teams can be upset in that first round. And, it should be interesting to see.
No doubt. Surprises will happen. You just don't know what corner they're hanging around. But yeah, is there any other matchups that you're kind of looking at that you're like, wow, I'm kind of curious on that one?
I think one matchup that we kind of glazed over earlier in the podcast, in 6A, Burlington Central is going to be facing off against Grant Community. I mean, it's going to be the first time that, Burlington Central is not only in the playoffs in 10 years, but it's going to be the first time that they host a playoff game in, I believe, even longer. And I think they're going to be playing for their first playoff win, not only, at home, but just in general since 2006. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, you know, Burlington shows out in that game. And yeah, like we kind of touched on, they faced, or if they win, they most likely face Geneva in the second round. And that's another game where it should be really interesting to see how both these teams play out, because I believe Matt Roderwald, who works for Burlington Central, but also has lived in Geneva for, I believe, his entire life. He's like, yeah, they've never played each other before, and I'm sure he's going to have an existential crisis of who to cheer for in that game. So,
have they really never played each other? I was not aware of that. So
no, I don't think they have.
Yeah, interesting. Well, if anybody knows, he would know with his connections to those schools. Yeah, I'm interested to see what Burlington Central does. They've been a really great story this year. What they've been able to do. Another team, before we get out of here, I'm kind of thinking they might be able to do a little bit of damage in the playoffs. Canelan, they got off to a great start to the year. Then they, took their lumps against some of the better teams in the Interstate Conference. They went down to Belleville Althoff, who's the number one team in 1A last Saturday. And, Althoff's really not a 1A team with the talent they had. And they led that game into the fourth quarter. Granted, Althoff was without one of their better players, but still a really good week 9 game. They go to Belvidere North in the first round, and that Nick 10 conference, it's got kind of an uneven playoff history. So I think that's a game that Canelan, they could do some things, and then they maybe get a favorable second round game as well. And I think Canelan's a team to keep an eye on as we go into the playoffs.
It could be the Cinderella story, basically, of 5A. So, it's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, Belvedere North, obviously, you kind of talked about it, comes from very, wishy-washy conference for the most part. And then if they head into the second.
It's a closed conference. When we say closed, they don't get like non-conference games during the season. So you just don't completely know what they're all about because they haven't really gone outside of the conference. And there's times where they do really show out, and there's times that they don't. So that's my only thing, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
So basically it's the upstate 8 of the east, or of the west side, basically.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, that's a good comparison. So yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of good stuff. Joel, you're going to be at Batavia on Friday night. I'm going to be at Downers Grove for Downers Grove North against Wheaton Warrenville South. Planning on heading out to Nazareth on Saturday to check them out. Haven't seen them yet this year. Want to definitely see them. But a lot of great stuff coming up on Friday Night Drive. We're going to be covering a ton of games all weekend. You want to check out JT Penalty and Eddie Carriffio, their South and West podcast as well. Great listen. But yeah, Joel, any thoughts as we go into Friday night before we get out of here?
I'm just excited for some playoff football.
Exactly. As am I. So hopefully it's not like 70 mile per hour winds or anything insane like that. But anyway, for Joe Boenitz, I'm Josh Welge. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Thursday.